You're about to see the bigger picture. Modern Hollywood seems to have become claustrophobic for creative minds under political correctness, and I think we've seen this play out before. In the conversation you're about to watch, Quentin Tarantino just gave Joe Rogan the vital historical perspective around Hollywood's relationship with PC culture, censorship, and violence. There's also some ideas here that I believe are worth a deeper exploration as it regards the creative trajectory of the industry, but watch this clip before I tell you more about it.
There's a lot of those films that you try to watch today, and you go, Jesus, I don't know if you could ever do this. Like, there's so many films that you try to watch today. Like, I just watched Superbad the other day. Yeah. And I'm like, man, I don't even know if you could do Superbad today. And that's not even that long ago.
Well, I don't believe in that kind of statement, because the thing about it is, I think that statement is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say it's going to be a problem, it's going to be a problem. All right, because it comes with usually the idea, well, I don't know if they would let you do that. Well, who the is they?
Great question. Is there a cabal of a governing class in Hollywood? Is it some kind of a shady censor board, or is it really just the audience that ultimately decides the fate of a movie? The answer is clearly the latter, because what makes Hollywood different to any other film industry is the world is how it regulates itself in a bottom-up manner rather than having a governing body that controls it. In that case, isn't it a massive testament to Quentin's force of character to be able to shepherd the audience from one era to another? The sensitivities of the audience around violence, offensive, unorthodox film themes have been oscillating since at least the 1960s, with each decade being different to the previous one. So imagine being a mind like Quentin, who becomes synonymous today for the kind of provocative cinema you see and yet feeling crushed under the weight of political correctness, coming out of the 80s. The question of who are they was enough to lift that weight off and allow him to give us cult classics like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. Who else can you think of when you imagine the people who broke that shell of political correctness with the edgy cinema and storylines? Perhaps director David Fincher with films like Fight Club and Seven can be counted as part of that change in the late 90s, but it's still hard to say that the new Hollywood wave, as it's sometimes called, was primarily the result of someone other than Quentin himself, since he started that shift in Hollywood right at the cusp of the 90s. But the question remains, is turning the direction of an entire industry along with the audience's tastes really just about going against the grain and standing your ground creatively? The answer seems to be yes, and that may be exactly the template we may need to follow in this decade as Hollywood embraces old taboos and self-censorship in new forms today.
And so I remember I was like sitting at Video Archives and I was saying, well, I want to do shit like that when I'm making movies. And then one of the guys said, well, they won't let you, Quentin. And my answer was, well, who's they? Who are they to tell me what I can and can't do, can or cannot do? And at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. I never let they stop me. I did what I wanted to do. And by doing what I wanted to do, we changed the 90s. The 90s stopped being politically correct. And all of a sudden, like in 1 year, Reservoir Dogs, El Mariachi, Man Bites Dog, Romeo is Bleeding. I mean, all these like wild, wild, ironic, violent movies started coming out that just didn't exist in 1989.
And I think what Quentin was able to do carried over to the 2000s as well. It started off with dark thriller and slasher films like American Psycho and Memento, and then the decade started challenging the audience's sensitivities and beliefs with films like Brokeback Mountain, putting LGBT themes on the big screen. Seemed like the 2 decades after Quentin rose to the occasion were a time of pushing away from PC culture to explore where the creative boundary really lies. But something changed massively in the decade of the 2010s. The rise of social media magnified people's politically correct sensitivities, while streaming platforms brought new and unprecedented competition for traditional cinema. And looking at that, there's only one realization that comes to mind: Hollywood is more vulnerable now than it has probably ever been. And I don't just mean financially, but in how true creativity is being suffocated under PC culture while eroding the trust and interest of the audience. Now, I think the reason Quentin only seemed to be getting more relevant in a changing film industry is simply the creative fortitude he has, not going along with whatever moral sensitivity the culture conjures up the films to follow. Quentin's own filmography is a testament to that, with films like Reservoir Dogs.
Was there any resistance? Like when you wrote Reservoir Dogs and people are going over it, were there any people that wanted to water it down or censor it or say it'd be more marketable if maybe you took certain scenes out? Or
Hari tried to talk me into cutting the torture scene out. With Mr. Blonde and the guy in the chair and
getting
the
his ear cut off.
Yeah. He tried to talk me out of that, and his reasoning was, he might ended up being right. All right, his reasoning was, look, Quentin, this is a movie that anybody can watch, but with that torture scene, you're gonna alienate women. They're not going to want to see this. And I go, well, you know, it's that movie. It's what the movie is. And you may be right, but I don't care. This is the movie, and it has that scene.
You know what's so interesting about Reservoir Dogs as a film? It's not just the torture scene as a build-up to the movie or the violence that caught some people off guard. It's how the film was able to weave together the decade of the 90s and 80s in their approach to thriller or slasher films under Quentin Tarantino. While most films the audience would know exactly what they were getting into, Quentin's filmography refused to put the element of violence into a separate category and instead decided to use it to bolster the artistic value of the plot. Between the 1980s and the early 2000s, you see a decade where the kind of raw slasher or gore films decreased in the decade of the 90s. That's because violence in films became more of a tool of storytelling and audiences had no choice but to grow a thicker skin for it. I think that's what Quentin deserves credit for. In the film, after that particular torture scene, the character of Mr. Blonde starts to be seen as unhinged and untrustworthy by his fellow gang members, especially after the cop he was torturing succumbs to injuries in a major turning point in the plot. And T's a testament to Quentin's genius, how he was able to take an element of senseless violence and gore that existed before and tie it into psychological thrillers that play on the audience's emotions and sensibilities. And it seems like Quentin was very aware of what he was doing, as well as the vital juncture in Hollywood he stood at, gauging from this interview about Reservoir Dogs from all the way back in 1992.
In the infamous torture scene, that everyone and his brother's talking about, the use of the song Stuck in the Middle with You, which is this light, bouncy, kind of cool song. All right, it not only does it not lighten up the scene, it makes the scene even harder to watch. Because you're sitting there and you're watching it, and all of a sudden this tune comes on, you're like, oh yeah, the guitar's playing, you're kind of tapping your toe, it's real catchy and everything. And then, boom, the hard stuff starts. All right, and you're like, Jesus Christ. And you're sitting there watching that, but it's too late. You're already a co-conspirator. You enjoyed the song, you enjoyed his dance, now you gotta take the hard stuff.
You might not think of it as a revolution today, but back then it was. Shocking audiences by playing on their visual and emotional sensitivities after making it part of an elaborate story was actually the first step towards taking down the political correctness of the 80s. That's a wave that lasted 2 decades, and now we're back in the clutches of a similar PC culture. Perhaps there's a director like Quentin needed now that shocks Hollywood of their hypnosis, and if this conversation with Joe Rogan reveals anything, it is that it may very well have to be Quentin Tarantino himself to play that part of the industry provocateur once again.